So please welcome Andrew Elliott, Director, NI Bureau.
Good morning and good afternoon to you all. You're most welcome to join me here today for what I think will be a very interesting conversation with three people who, in the course of providing leadership through an extremely challenging situation, something that Marcin probably rightly described as a hurricane, they're really well placed to talk to us about the tragic human and other costs that have accompanied what our two sister cities have just come through together. They are Michael J. Dowling, who is President and CEO of Northwell Health since 2002, is one of healthcare's most influential voices and oversees the largest integrated healthcare system in the New York State. Born in Limerick, Ireland, he is a key advisor at the present time to Governor Andrew Cuomo on tackling the pandemic. Another guest from Belfast is Pat Cullen, who is Director of Nursing for Northern Ireland in the Royal College of Nursing, has 35 years of nursing experience, and in recent months has been heavily involved in representing the interests of nurses through an incredibly challenging period. And then thirdly, as Marcin has mentioned, Richie Torres, who as councillor representing the 15th Council District in Central Bronx is chair of the Oversights and Investigations Committee on New York City Council and active on a huge range of important social issues. I'd like to start with you, Michael, if I may. Could you maybe give us an overview of the kinds of challenging situations that you've had to deal with since March, the kinds of things where you've been expected to step in and provide solutions where maybe the answers weren't always obviously easy?
Yeah, delighted to be on this, and I thank you so much for inviting me. It has been a very interesting period of time, as you can imagine. We at our organization here, we have seen over 50,000 COVID patients. About 15,000 of them are in our hospitals. The highest census we had was 3,500 COVID patients in our inpatient facilities each single day during the early part of April. I worked obviously with all of the other health systems in the region and obviously with the governor. And I believe that overall it was handled pretty well. The biggest challenges, and I don't look at things as challenges as much. I tend to look at opportunities all of the time. But the biggest issues were making sure we kept the staff safe, kept the morale high, managed the stress and the fear factor the staff went through, and the staff handled this situation extraordinarily well. Nurses, of course, being at the center of it all, with the physicians and the respiratory therapists, the social workers, etc. So maintaining that staff comfort was number one. Creating new beds. In our health system alone, we created 2,000 extra beds. We were creating 200 extra beds every single day. And then, of course, that was the issue of the PPE, the masks, the gloves, which we handled pretty well. There were shortages in some places in New York because the whole distribution system was disrupted because most of our PPE come from China, and that was disrupted. So we had to find alternatives to deal with this. The nursing home issue became a big issue because the nursing homes are not as prepared as we thought they should be. And that's an ongoing issue. It's an issue in Ireland, I know, and it's an issue in pretty much every other state in the union. If you look at it, if you stand back from it all and you think of what occurred over the course of the last 2 months, it's a pretty phenomenal experience, and we've learned from it. And I think that we will all be better because of this, because I think it changes our perspective. It gets us to rethink differently. It gets the focus on the inner city communities, which I'm working on heavily at the moment, because the poorer communities in the region, I'm sure this occurs everywhere else, had a disproportionate impact, negative impact of the coronavirus. So now that forces us to deal with that issue going forward more than we've ever done before. So it's been handled pretty well. When you know that healthcare workers are special people when you observe them in a crisis like this. and that gives you hope that we can almost do anything given the talent that we've got in our organization, in our workforce. And I spent a lot of my time on the front lines and the ICUs, on the hospital floors. I still do it, and now out in those communities that are most negatively affected by it all. So overall, a difficult time, but I would say if we don't learn from this, there is something wrong.
Just picking up on the things you were saying there, what kind of leadership skills did you find were called upon most in this particular challenge or context? Being optimistic, sense of optimism. This is not a time for being delusional. This is not in a crisis like this. It's not a time to be negative and pessimistic. You got to be upbeat. You got to be positive. You got to be telling people we will succeed. This is going to work. The second thing is to communicate. Constant communication, which we did. The third thing is to be out there in person, to be visible, not to hide, not to be in your office, not to sit behind your computer, but to be out with the staff on the front line so you can develop that element of trust, get them to understand that they're with you, you're with them. This is a team approach. Doesn't matter what your title is. You're out there giving a sense of comfort, optimism, security, and trust. And I think those were the central ingredients. And I think the governor in the state of New York did a lot of this. We obviously lack a lot of national leadership here, as people know, in this circumstance. But when you get down to the ground floor where we work each and every day, those attributes I just mentioned, I think, are the most key. Okay. Can I turn now to Pat for a moment and pick up? Pat, could you tell us a bit about how the last couple of months have been for you and the experience you've had in the Belfast context?
Yes, Andrew, and I'm really pleased to be here today to speak on behalf of my colleagues and the Royal College of Nursing. I am a nurse, as you said, for 38 years, and I'm absolutely privileged to be a nurse and privileged to lead the Royal College of Nursing. Through what has been very difficult times for nurses in Northern Ireland, but the tenacity and stickability of those nurses has never relinquished on behalf of the people of Northern Ireland, and certainly on behalf of the profession. So it was just a couple of months before the pandemic struck that our nurses in Northern Ireland were actually standing on picket lines and taking strike action in Northern Ireland. That was the first time that nurses in Northern Ireland had taken strike action in 104 years. So that says something about how far they were pushed, really, in terms of needing to stand up and speak up on behalf of their patients. And nurses in Northern Ireland took strike action principally and primarily because they realised that the health service was in an absolute crisis in relation to safe staffing. That was the reason why they got on those picket lines on those snowy, frosty mornings. And they were doing that at a time when we had no assembly in Northern Ireland. So they felt as if their patients were being forgotten about. And luckily enough, as a consequence of the strike action that they took, we have seen our assembly now re-established and an executive restored, which every nurse in Northern Ireland is absolutely delighted about, because we need political leadership. And my goodness, have we ever seen that we needed political leadership more than through a pandemic. As a consequence of our executive being restored, our Minister, Robin Swan, who's our health minister, very quickly got engaged with those nurses and with other healthcare workers who were also taking industrial action. And we agreed a safe staffing nurse framework, which we were able to put then to our nurses, that enabled us then to suspend the strike action. But it was very quickly after that, and really nurses hadn't had a chance even to catch their breath at this stage when the pandemic struck. And again, as your previous speaker said, nurses really stepped up and stepped out and do what nurses do best, and that is make sure that their patients come first no matter what. And that was very evident to us in terms of re-establishing new services, setting up additional beds in Northern Ireland to deal with the pandemic, moving right across services, ensuring that their patients were looked after through the enhanced intensive care beds that were put up as well. So nurses really demonstrated once again their exceptional expertise, their professional expertise, and their profound courage really on behalf of their patients through all of that period. They left no stone unturned to do what they needed to do for their patients. There have been many lessons learned, Andrew, as a consequence of that, and particularly the response that nurses have had has gone beyond everyone's expectations here. They've been central to tackling the pandemic right across every country. We can see that not just in Northern Ireland. We've seen how nurses really have stepped up to address large health challenges. So if there ever was a time to underpin the need for better investment and better resourcing in the nursing profession, it's now. And it's on the back of the World Health Organization that we all have to pay particularly attention to as our guiding lights in terms of what we need to do now. And the International Council of Nurses, who recently, just a few weeks ago, presented their report on nursing globally. And it looks at the head count of nursing across the 191 countries, which is 28 million. But we have a shortage right across the world of 5.9 million nurses. And 20% of all nursing posts around the world are vacant. And for me, as a director of nursing, I think that's an incredible indictment really on us all right across the world, because you cannot operate a health service without nurses. And certainly the emergence of coronavirus has proven that the nursing workforce has been the bedrock of the preparedness and strong health systems that we need in place to ensure that our health workers are able to provide for our populations. Investing in nurses and health workers, we know, is not just good for our economies, it's good for our national securities and for our own personal freedoms. So we do need a total change in mindset and thinking about the value of nursing right across the world, and particularly here in Northern Ireland. I think we have a lot to learn from how nurses really stepped up in this pandemic.
Do you think there's a new sense of understanding of the value of the nursing profession, of the value of nurses as a result of what we've come through in the last few months among the general public? Pat, can you hear me? I'll maybe turn now to, if I can, I'll turn now to Richie Torres. Richie, could you give us a little bit of your experience of having been an elected representative representing a part of the Bronx through this incredibly challenging period?
Sure. I mean, just the world that, first of all, thank you for having me and thank you for the kind introduction. But the world's been radically reshaped. I'm both a council member and a congressional candidate, and both have taken a backseat to the response to COVID-19. Whenever I'm out in the field, my life is nothing but food distribution or the distribution of PPE, because many of the families in my businesses, which were struggling before the outbreak of COVID-19, have seen the world around them collapse. And our priority has been to get food to the families in greatest need. The fiscal reality in the city is complicated. We have seen, for 7 years, I've been in the city council, and I've had the luxury of governing in times of prosperity. And we've seen a decade's worth of job growth vanish in the span of a few weeks. 900,000 jobs have disappeared from New York City. We're confronting a $9 billion deficit. And to be blunt, we have no clear strategy for closing it in the absence of federal funding, which seems unlikely. And more than half of the city's revenues come from real estate. And struggling businesses and families, if those businesses and families stop paying their rent and landlords stop paying property taxes, then the city's going to hemorrhage the revenue that we need to provide essential services and the social safety net in the moment of greatest need. So this is a crisis the likes of which we have not seen. And, we have to be optimistic. We have to do our best. But anyone who tells you that the situation in New York City is hopeful, the numbers tell a different story.
Yeah, this particular crisis has seen a very disproportionate impacts on certain communities and certain groups and so on. Could you say a little bit about what that has meant in practice in New York and how the city has to try to respond to that?
Sure. So, I represent the South Bronx, which has been the hardest hit by COVID-19. The South Bronx has the highest rate per capita. And it's hardly an accident because the South Bronx is the poorest county in New York State. Part of the reason is the greater prevalence of pre-existing conditions. Almost all COVID-19 fatalities have at least one comorbidity. The two most common among them are hypertension and diabetes, and the rates of hypertension and diabetes are far higher in the South Bronx than elsewhere in the city. And so our residents are at much greater risk of becoming seriously ill or even dying from COVID-19. A disproportionate share of the essential workforce comes from the Bronx, and essential workers are on the front lines facing much higher risk of exposure. And the affordability crisis is a factor here. As the city has become less and less affordable, more and more people are doubling up and tripling up. And those overcrowded apartments, which are heavily concentrated in the Bronx, have become petri dishes for the spread of infectious disease.
Thank you. We've got a little bit of time left, and I wanted to take this opportunity to ask each of you in turn, maybe starting with you, Richie. But I mean, obviously the costs of this have been horrendous, and the impact on human lives and on communities have been horrendous. But out of everything, that there are also things that we learn and that potentially create opportunities that Michael mentioned a while ago. Do you see good things as well as the difficulties that can come out of this, so that in addition to costs, there are some benefits?
I am hopeful. A favorite quote of mine is from Friedrich Nietzsche, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. And I'm confident we're going to emerge stronger, wiser, and better from this experience. I think we have a newfound appreciation for public health and the need to build a public health army in the United States. And I do sense among the public, there's a newfound appreciation for the politics of competence. With the exception of the governor, who has been a marvelous communicator, the leadership at both the local level and the national level has been too small to fit the size of the challenges we face. So there's a recognition from the public that there's a dearth of political leadership, and that we have to appoint highly competent leaders who can respond effectively to crises like COVID-19. So in that sense, I'm hopeful.
Okay, thank you. Pat, do you want to address the same question about the positives emerging from a very difficult situation? I'm not sure if Pat can hear me. At least I can't hear Pat at this point. I'll maybe turn to Michael then. Michael, could you say a little bit about what you see as the sunlight perhaps coming over the horizon, if there is any?
Yeah, just one point that this crisis is not over. We're going to be living through this for many, 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 many years. So let's not fool ourselves that it is over. We'll have a vaccine for pandemic, but the unemployment, the economic issues will go on for years here, as Richie mentioned. The good things, I think it has changed us all a little bit. I think there's a reawakening about what it is we need to do more than we ever did before. I think we need to rethink healthcare, rethink its delivery, rethink the structure of how we deliver it, the use of technology, the need for massive investment in those communities that were disproportionately affected by this, the rebuilding of the public health crisis, the rebuilding of the public health infrastructure, and there's a different mood now by everybody, and this is a decade-long effort. And when you juxtapose this with the issues that are going on over here right now because of the George Floyd issue that everybody is aware of, and you have these combinations, this constellation of activities coming together, I see it as a tipping point in the US, hopefully, and hopefully it will also change our politics so we become less toxic, less partisan. We unify together to solve the crisis of pandemic. Black, white, blue, green, everybody worked together during the crisis on the floors of the hospital. It was amazing to see. We should see that now in the community in general as we come out from this and proceed with the rebuilding over the next decade. And with the right leadership at every level, I think that we will see this. But the cost, there's going to be costs and benefits for well over a decade here. That's important to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. And thank you, Michael, Pat and Richie, for your contributions today. I'm going to hand back now to Marcin to take the rest of the conference forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael, Dowling, Pat, Cullen. We lost